Hi everybody, my name is Tor Mitchell, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about product management. Before I get stuck in, just a little bit about me and why I'm here. So, a long time ago, I studied physics for 4 years, and while I was at university, I got a summer job at a small internet company in my hometown, which is Bournemouth. And thought this stuff seems kind of interesting. It was just beginning to take off at that point, and it became clear that when I graduated, I was going to gravitate towards that, not necessarily stick with physics. So we ended up at a company called Sun Microsystems. Some of you may have heard of Sun Microsystems. They were a big sort of workstation, Unix workstation vendor back in the 90s. A lot of the kind of early internet infrastructure was based on their technology, and they were also the company that developed Java, the programming language. They were a great company to work for. I was with them for about 8 years in the UK and then in Santa Clara in Silicon Valley. Before I moved back and joined Google. So I joined Google in London in 2006 in a technical role, not necessarily a software developer role, but as an engineer supporting companies that were using some of Google's technology. And while I was at Google, I discovered product management as a role. I'd never heard of it before, didn't know what it was. But I'd been sort of looking to try and figure out what I really want to do in the long term. And this really resonated with me. And so while I was working for Google, about a few years in, by which time I moved to Sydney, Australia, and was working out of their office there, I moved into product management, working on Google Maps. Spent many happy years in Sydney working on Google Maps, then moved back to San Francisco, worked for Google for a couple of years in San Francisco, and then after about 9 years total at Google, I joined Crowdcube early last year. Now, if you're not familiar with Crowdcube, they're an equity crowdfunding startup. So they help companies raise finance through a crowdfunding model. It's an alternative to venture capital or angel investing, although it's often done in collaboration or in conjunction with rounds that are done through those kinds of channels. And I joined Crowdcube to lead their product team. They're a little bit unusual. They're based down in Exeter, in Devon, rather than up in London. And have been there for 2 years now. So, that's why I'm here. Well, that's my background, but why am I here? Well, the first job I had at Crowdcube was to build a team. It's to hire product managers. And I was keen to hire both experienced product managers and maybe 1 or 2 entry-level, kind of graduate-level product managers. Because Google has a very well-established and successful graduate training scheme for product managers, and I'd seen how well that could work. It turned out, this is the job advert that we put up, actually, for that graduate-level role, and it was extraordinarily difficult to fill. And one of the reasons it was hard to fill was because nobody's heard of product management. If you haven't heard of the role, why would you come looking for it? Why would you even stop to look at an advert you've seen about product management when you're at the point where you're looking for a job? And this worried me greatly because as we get into it, hopefully you'll understand that product management is a very central function to modern technology companies. And as the UK startup ecosystem grows, we'll need more and more of them. But there's just no pipeline in the UK for product managers. So I decided that I would make an attempt to do something about this and put together this presentation, which I've now delivered to a number of student audiences, just to raise the profile of product management and get them to think about it as a possible career path. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to offer you a job, I'm afraid. It's just about awareness. So you might say, well, that's all very well and good, but... Oh, let me talk about that. That's all very well and good, but this is an entrepreneurial course. Right? We all want to start companies. Why are you here telling us about this job that, frankly, is not relevant to us? Well, it turns out that it is quite relevant to you for a number of reasons. Firstly, a lot of product managers go on to found companies. What you'll see as we go through this presentation is that the skill set required to be a product manager overlaps very heavily with the skill set required to start a company. And so if perhaps you have entrepreneurial ambitions but you're not quite ready to start that company, then product management is a great place to go to continue developing your skills in preparation for that. What's also the case is that as a result of this, when large technology companies like Google or Facebook acquire a startup, the founders tend to be brought into the company as product managers. So if you found a company, it goes well, you get acquired, you may end up being a product manager whether you like it or not. Lastly, if your company does well and starts to grow, you'll reach a point as a founder where the amount of time you have available to spend really thinking deeply about your product and what it is begins to drain away as you have to worry about financing and recruiting and a whole world of other stuff that CEOs worry about. And at some point, you will start to feel pressure from your investors, from your board, from other people you work with to hire some product managers into the organization to pick up that workload from you. So it will be worth you understanding what product managers do, even if you never end up having to be one, because you will almost certainly need to work with them at some point. Okay, so that's the basic setup. The actual structure of the presentation looks like this. What is a product manager? What do we do? What is the point of us? Is this right for you? It's the sort of thing you might be interested in. And then if it is, how would you go about becoming a product manager? One thing I'll just mention, you probably see, I'm videoing this presentation. I try and video all the presentations I do. It helps me to improve them over time, and I also publish them on a website. So you're welcome to ask questions at any time, but if you do, be aware that your voice will be on tape. If you're not comfortable with that, just ask questions at the end, because any Q&A at the end I won't put on the internet. Okay. So, what is a product manager? All right. I'm going to be a bit more specific, because generally, I work in the technology sector, and it's a sort of a given that when we talk about product managers, we mean digital product managers. But sometimes you'll see it prefixed that way, because the concept of a product manager is beginning to expand out beyond just the technology space into other disciplines. So this is kind of obvious, but before we talk about what a product manager is, we just have to briefly talk about what a product is. And by product, I mean pretty much any hardware, software, or service that is offered to consumers or businesses. Anything that falls into that category, be it an app on your phone, be it a digital camera, be it a software as a service provider, benefits from or likely has a product manager associated with it. Okay, so if you're going to sum up the role of a product manager in a single phrase, they own the success of the product. Their job is to make this product successful. It's that simple. You might say, well, that's a huge thing. There's like so many aspects to doing that. Yes. That's what makes it interesting. So an analogy that I've heard used quite often that I quite like is that of the conductor of an orchestra. If you think about the conductor of an orchestra, they don't play any instruments. However, they do decide what music will be played, and then they orchestrate all the musicians to deliver the best possible experience for the audience. The product managers have a lot in common with that. As you'll see, don't necessarily build the product. We're not stuck in the code. But we are coordinating all the functions needed to bring a great product to market and ensure that users have a really good experience. What's interesting about product managers is that despite having the word manager in the title, you don't actually manage people. You manage a product. So what I mean by that is you don't have organizational authority over the people you rely on to deliver this product into market. You rely solely on influence rather than authority. So it's a very people-centric role. You have to build strong relationships. You have to build empathy. You have to understand the needs of both your users and also all the other stakeholders and teams you're working with to get stuff done. And you have to build trust. You have to build trust that you as a product manager, that with you the product is in good hands. Okay, so the interesting thing about being a product manager is you're the only role, pretty much, that is involved with the product, closely, intimately involved with the product, throughout its entire life cycle. From the moment someone has the idea, all the way through to the day you decide that it's past its prime and you kill it off. So what I'm going to do is just talk through the stages of product life cycle and what the role of a product manager is in relation to each of those stages. So firstly, you have the idea. Right, good ideas can come from anywhere. In fact, there's no shortage of good ideas. And you can get ideas from your friends, from customers, from colleagues. You might have it in the shower. There's lots of good ideas in the world. But they don't necessarily, in and of themselves, mean make a compelling product. You have to bring those ideas together and form a coherent vision for what a compelling product will look like. And then you have to build a business case for why the company or organization you're in should develop that product. Why does this product deserve to exist in the world? What is it trying to achieve? Who does it serve? What problems will it solve? How do you measure its success? You have to really think deeply about what you're doing and how you assess the performance of that product. Because you can't make a product successful unless you know what success looks like. So let's assume that you've built that case and you've got support to go ahead with this product. Next up, we need to do some research, because ideas can seem good on paper, but until you actually speak to the people you intend to serve, you have no idea if this product is actually going to be useful, if it's actually addressing the needs they really have. And there's lots of different ways you can do research. You can do one-on-one research. Some organizations have lab environments where they bring people in to test products or to do interviews with customers. You can do group research, you can do workshops, you can do focus groups, or you can just survey your customers, just send out an email. There's lots of different ways you can do research, but it's a very central part of the role, because you really have to understand your audience. So design. So design is not just about does it look pretty. Design is about what is the actual experience as you go through the product as a user. What are the flows? What's your interaction model? But then also, what's the visual language you're using to help people understand where they are and what they're doing? It's about the typography, it's about the iconography, it's about the color psychology. There's a lot of things you have to think about in designing a really, really great product. Now, obviously, you're not a designer. Your organization will likely have some designers, and they will take the requirements that you provide, which will have been compiled based on the research that you've done, and they will come up with a set of proposed designs for your product. And then, as the product manager, you work with them to optimize those designs and make sure that they really serve the need, that they really empathize with the audience. You are kind of the user representative in that conversation, and you have to make sure that, that as a user coming to this product for the first time, it feels intuitive, it's easy to understand how it works and what they have to do with it. So then, obviously, once you've got designs, you've got your requirements, you hand that off to your engineers, and they will start building this product. And as the product manager, you're not coding, as I mentioned, not normally anyway, but there's still a lot to do. Okay, so partly this is about coordination and project management to some extent. So you have to obviously manage a schedule. You have to make sure that the momentum is maintained as the product is developed. You have to essentially shield the developers, protect them from distractions and from interference by the rest of the business. And because developers are much more productive if they're just allowed to focus. So you're the person that the rest of the business comes to if they have questions about this product. Why are we building it? What will it do? How will we sell it? How will it be marketed? There are a million questions that come up during the development of the product, and you're the single point of contact within the organization. You're also the maker of trivial decisions, as I call it. Essentially, when you're developing a product, there are 1,000,001 tiny little, relatively inconsequential decisions that come up all the time. Should this button be red or should it be blue? What should the label be here? Is this column wide enough? All manner of little things. Sometimes it's to do with the copy, sometimes it's to do with compliance, it could be anything. And you'll find that your engineers aren't necessarily comfortable just unilaterally making those decisions. They need someone to turn to who has all the context. And that's where you come in. So your job really is to keep momentum going by just making sure that these little things don't slow things down. You're also the first user of the product. You're the first person who tries it. And as the user representative, it's your job to make sure it works. So the larger companies might have QA or test teams. Smaller startups, it'll probably be down to you to actually try the product out, try and break it in as many creative ways as possible, log bugs as you find them, and then verify fixes as they're made. So you really obsess over the quality in order to deliver a product that you can be proud of. Okay, and then eventually, hopefully, you get to a launch. And launches can be quite complex things. It really depends a lot on the nature of the product and the business you're in, but you need a strategy for how you're going to launch this product, how you're going to take it to market. So the marketing team, if you have one, will want to understand what your go-to-market strategy is, what your messaging is, what your branding is, how you're presenting this. Your sales team will need to be prepared to sell this product. Do they understand how it works and what it offers? If you've got a support team, can they answer questions about it? Have they been trained? Have they had support readiness training? Your legal team will want to make sure that you're compliant. So ProudQ, we're in a regulated industry, for example. We have to worry about the Financial Conduct Authority. So are we compliant? Have we thought about privacy? Have we thought about security? And then obviously the executive leadership team will want to know what's going on. They'll want to know how it's going, so you're their main point of contact throughout that whole process of getting this thing out the door. So you can see that you're part of the whole process from the beginning to the end, because you're the person most closely associated with this product at the company. Okay, so that being said, is this the role for you? So there's two sub-questions to this. One is, are you right for the role? And the second is the role right for you? So this is kind of ironic, because I didn't know he'd actually be in the room. So as part of this project, I've been going around and interviewing product managers at various different companies, and just talking to them about how they got into product management, why they enjoy it, would they recommend it, and what tips would they have someone who's interested in getting involved. And at the end of this presentation, I'll point you to the website. You can go and see all these interviews as they get posted. I just want to play a clip from this one, which is Ignatius' interview, which we did earlier this year, and which I thought was particularly pertinent to this question of why would you want to be a product manager. The question now is whether the audio is going to work, isn't it? Let's try.
Well, you can overdub it.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, give it a go. I have plugged that in, so we never know.
Do you want me to help with the audio? No.
Yeah, maybe. We can always, save from the embarrassment if necessary.
Well, worst case you can use just put the mic.
Right, yeah, that's true. I can just put it on really loud.
No, it's fine.
Oh, no, because HDMI is plugged in, it won't do that. Let's play it.
Oh, probably the wrong. Yeah.
Oh, well. Okay, I can probably make this work, but it's probably not worth the distraction.
Is it working?
I think it's playing, but it's not playing audio.
Yeah, well, they'll give you mic feedback as well.
Okay. All right, so the gist of what he said is it's about seeing the joy on people's faces when you give them something that they really need. I think that's very, very powerful. It's certainly true that if you are the product manager for a product you really believe in.
Do you want Ignacio to actually share with us? I mean, he's here.
He might have turned really bitter and twisted since I last spoke to him.
Sure.
Well, this is cool. This has become live theatre.
Live demo. So what's kind of paraphrase what I said?
Yeah, just read your lips.
I think, if I remember correctly, basically the joy of product management for me was seeing a problem from your users and going through that collaborative process with your designers and your engineers of kind of scoping out the solution, and you put a lot of energy into bringing that solution to life, but it all really pays off basically on the day that you launch your feature or product, because you get to see the joy of the fruits of your labour. And I think that's what makes product management worth it, because it's a huge payoff at the end. And yeah, I think you get to work with a lot of great people on the way. Yeah.
Cool. You need to come to every future presentation that I do.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as you've probably got the impression already, there are a lot of functions you end up working with. And you're not in any of these functions, but you do learn a lot about them. You do get a little bit of experience in all of these areas as you work with all these different teams. You begin to understand how they work, how they think, what they care about, what incentives they operate under, and begin to empathize with them as functions. And that's what makes the role so valuable. That's what makes it such an interesting training ground. Because all of these skills will be valuable to you at some point in your career. Okay, so this is just a short list of example companies that hire and employ product managers in the UK. It's not, but it's the tip of the iceberg. I literally just did a couple of quick searches on a few job sites for people who are actually recruiting right now, and combined with a few people I've met at various different events. But you can basically see it's the sort of the great and the good of technology companies across the UK. What you tend to find is that companies start to look for product managers when they reach the size of about 40 or 50 people, in my experience. And then from there, it's on up into the tens and hundreds of thousands of people. So where can you go as a product manager? Where can it take you? So as I mentioned, a lot of product managers either go and found their own startup, or they might join a startup after working for a larger company when they've got some experience. They might also end up in executive leadership roles. So to give you some examples of this, the founder of Instagram used to be a product manager, the founder of Polyvore used to be a product manager, the CEO of Google, the current one, Sundar, came up through Google as a product manager. The CEO of Yahoo started out as a product manager at Google and founded their graduate training program, one of their earliest employees. And there's other roles that, a little bit more diverse. I have a friend who was a product manager for a long time and then went to, was heavily involved, basically ran the technology team for Hillary Clinton's election campaign. Someone else I worked with left Google and is now a partner at one of the top tier VC firms in Silicon Valley. So it can really take you places. One thing I mentioned is international travel. This is an extremely transferable skill. In fact, at Google, they poll all of their product managers every 6 months and ask them if they'd be interested in moving to another office in another country. And if you say yes, they start just sending you jobs and encouraging you to do it, because they believe there's a lot of value in transferring skills and cultural awareness around different offices. And that was why it was so easy for me to go to Sydney, to go to San Francisco, and I could have, at a flick of a switch, moved back to London with them as well. Okay, so that's the good stuff in terms of motivation. It's important to also mention that it's a reasonably well compensated role and it has a good kind of long-term trajectory as well. This data is, to be honest, a little bit out of date, and I've been chasing the organisation behind it for updated figures, but it's not too far off my kind of expectations right now, because I did adjust the numbers for inflation. But as you can see, there's a credible path there. So, in summary, you get both responsibility and autonomy. So you get a strong say in what you're doing, essentially. You're actually doing something worthwhile. You work with a lot of interesting people. You develop very valuable skills across the spectrum. You're privileged enough to understand the big picture around what's going on, particularly in smaller companies where there may only be 1 or 2 products. And so what you're doing is essentially spanning the whole company. And then you have a lot of long-term options to go from there. So that's why I believe it's a great role. But it's also important that you're well suited to it. Right? It's not necessarily a role for everybody. And so what you tend to find is that good product managers have certain character traits that stand out. It's a leadership role. Now I mentioned you don't manage people, but you're still a leader. You're a leader in the sense that you're showing people the way. You'll find that engineering teams particularly, they really draw on the product manager, or they take cues from the product manager in terms of how things are going. So if you seem down, the whole team will go down with you. If you're optimistic, you'll lift everybody up. And this is particularly important when things are difficult. If the product's struggling, or you're struggling to get a release out, it's important that you're there kind of as the bedrock of the team. Obviously, communication skills are essential. In fact, I would argue that the single most important skill for a product manager is empathy. And it's not just about empathy with the users or the customers. It's about empathy with everybody you work with. Because when you're up against a deadline and there's 2 weeks to go and you're trying to get a release out and you've got all these different teams who are involved and they're all under pressure, you really need to be able to understand those pressures in order to keep a lid on things and keep everything working smoothly and everybody in good temper. Takes a lot of energy. The best product managers have a kind of a boundless, unlimited belief in the value and potential of technology as a force for good in the world. So you have to really believe that what you're doing is worthwhile, and that has to be infectious. I mentioned about the importance of owning the quality, of really caring about the details, sweating the small stuff. Obviously, there's an element of creativity to this role. You're looking at problems and trying to look at them in new ways. You're trying to see opportunities to deliver products and services that haven't been delivered before, or to improve the way in which something's done. All technology companies now are very data-driven organizations, and as a central function, your product management is no exception. You have to, as I mentioned, you have to have a clear sense of what success looks like. That normally maps to a set of metrics. You have to understand those metrics deeply, and you have to understand what you're doing to try and move those metrics in the right direction. You have to be kind of curious, intellectually curious. I put opinionated on there, and that's a tough one because there's sort of negative connotations. And I don't mean it in a negative way. What I mean is you have to be the sort of person who holds opinions and is comfortable voicing them. Because ultimately, someone needs to stand up and say what needs to be said to get the right thing done.
Sorry.
Yeah?
How about being critical, questioning the way you're gonna find a solution for this problem?
You certainly have to be always looking for opportunities to do things better. I think there's right and wrong ways to approach that. One of the things that someone said to me recently, which I really liked, was you often find yourself in situations where you believe a decision needs to be changed, but it's not necessarily your decision to make. It's someone else's decision. It's one of the people in that graph who have to make a decision. And you believe the wrong thing is being done, and you have to persuade them to do what you believe is the right thing. And the way to do that is not necessarily to criticize them for the decision they're making. It's to make them believe that they changed their mind and make them feel the hero for doing it. So there's sort of an art to this, right? There's an art to being persuasive in a way that allows people to protect their egos, manage their reputation, and continue working with you and enjoy working with you. Because there's always tomorrow, right? You've always got to come back the next day and work with these people, and you'll need them again. And then the last thing is humility, which might seem somewhat contradictory to all this confidence and enthusiasm and optimism and energy. But actually, you will make mistakes fairly regularly. And the important thing is that you are willing to stick your hand up and say, you know what, that was the wrong thing to do. Let's go do this differently now. We've learned from that experience, and we'll try again. Okay, I realise this is a pretty long list, and it might seem a little bit intimidating. And the reality is that not every new product manager, ticks off every one of these boxes. But if you see a bit of yourself in this list, then this might be a good role for you. And if you like to be the sort of person that I've just described, then this is a role that can take you there. So this is another video which is also not going to work. But this time, if you just give me 1 second, I have a solution. Because this slide was in an earlier version of the deck, which also didn't work in a similar situation, and consequently, I have a transcript. So this is a guy called Marty Kagan. Marty Kagan is a very, very well-respected product manager in the field. He was originally a product manager at Netscape, who an early browser company, then spent a lot of time at eBay. These days he runs an organization called the Silicon Valley Product Group, and does a lot of training and consulting in product management around the world. And I caught up with him in London early in the year when I actually went to one of his workshops. And at the end, I sat him down and pointed the camera at him and asked him a few questions about product management. And this was a particular excerpt from what he said that I thought was very compelling again. And the key point here is the importance of the role and the value it has as a skill set in the long term. Okay. So, if this was something you wanted to do, how would you go about making that happen? So, the large technology companies, particularly the modern large technology companies, they all have graduate recruitment and training programs specifically for product managers. Google really set the template for this with their APM program. It stands for Associate Product Manager. As I say, it was started by Marissa Mayer back when she was at Google. And it's a 2-year rotational program with training where they bring you into the organization, they assign you to a particular product for a year, and then after a year you get rotated onto another product. You have some say in what product you work on. You can express preferences. And also it's quite common for the second product to be in a different country. So they move people around the world as part of the program. And at the end of it, so you become, a lot of people will either stay with the second of the 2 products, they will actually sort of graduate into a full product management role, or they will take the opportunity to move to another team within Google. Facebook have a similar program, somewhat modeled on Google. It's a bit faster moving. It's 3 rotations over 18 months. They call it the Rotational Product Management Program, RPM. Yahoo have a similar program that is a carbon copy of Google's, because Marissa went to Yahoo and just said, we're going to do that. And then Microsoft is a little bit of an interesting case because they have a role called program manager, which is, if anything, really the same thing as a product manager. Because there already was a product manager role at Microsoft, and it's more marketing focused. So you need to be a little bit careful with Microsoft just to make sure you know what you're applying for. I have checked Apple and I have checked Amazon, and I can't see any similar programs there. They obviously do hire product managers. I just haven't seen a graduate recruitment program. If the big company thing doesn't appeal to you, then there are lots and lots of small companies, obviously startups, that are also interesting to work for. A particularly compelling place to learn the skills is in kind of a growth stage startup, a company that has got to that point where they've found product market fit and they're growing very fast. That's kind of the most intense environment you can work in, and that's where you can really learn a lot very quickly. I've listed just a few places you might want to look here if you're looking for a job at a startup. Work in Startups is a funny website because it looks like it was built in 1999, but it does have a lot of good listings on it. AngelList, from a recruiting perspective, was a great place when I was looking for really good candidates, and increasingly technology companies gravitating towards AngelList. LinkedIn is a mixed bag. The problem with LinkedIn is that it's such a huge audience. As a recruiter, you get a lot of applications from people who are clearly not qualified. They've just gone and applied for everything. Yes. So if you're applying for a job through LinkedIn, you really have to put some effort in to stand out. And then Mind the Product are an interesting organisation. They started in London. They run conferences in London and San Francisco for product managers. And they also manage Product Tank, which is a series of meetups around the world, including one that happens just down the road here once a month. But they also have a jobs board, which companies can list product management roles on. So I'm going to skip through some of this stuff because I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but this is basically having recruited. When I was recruiting last year, I reviewed over 200 applications, and some trends stood out, the worst of which was just a shocking amount of bad grammar and spelling. It sounds obvious, but you're just amazed at how many people screw that up. But the thing that really matters when you're trying to apply for a role is tell me something about who you are, why you're interested in the role, and why you write for it. Make sure your online presence is in reasonably good shape. I'm not the sort of person who will stalk you on Facebook, but I have had people who apply whose CV doesn't match their LinkedIn profile. Like they've changed all their job titles to make it sound like they're more suited to my role from what they've got on LinkedIn. Like if you're going to do that kind of thing, at least make an effort. And then, hopefully if things go well, you'll get to the interview stage. And product management interviews, they have a sort of pattern to them. And there are sort of 5 key areas that these companies tend to focus on when they are recruiting. We'll go through each of these in turn. But before we do that, just a couple of kind of pointers. Again, I apologise if this is all stuff you've heard before. But the most important thing I want to say about interviewing, particularly at a large company, is as an interviewer, I'm not just trying to figure out what you know. I'm trying to figure out whether I want to spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week in a room with you, which means we have to get along, right? And that means that really what I want to have is a conversation. I want to have a discussion. I want you to engage, and I want you to enjoy yourself, to be blunt. And that might seem a bit unrealistic in an interview, but actually, really, if you find a good company who are doing interesting work, you should find the process quite enjoyable. But first, you need to relax. You need to be comfortable taking a breath, comfortable thinking about things, not feeling the need to fill the space. And you need to take the opportunity to really show them who you are and what your strengths are. Okay, so I mentioned there are a series of different interview types, and I'll just rattle through them. Product instincts is about your ability to recognize a good product when you see one, or understand what makes a product good. So they'll ask you questions. They might ask you questions about designing a product for a particular type of audience. This question, design a vending machine for the blind, is a question I actually had myself when I was looking to convert to being a product manager at Google. And what they're trying to do here is understand whether you can empathize with an audience, whether you can understand the needs of that audience, whether you understand, you can recognize the constraints that might apply to this problem, and the sensitivities. And what I would say, because I did a lot of interviewing at Google, is you find some people think that we're looking for the cleverest, most complicated solution possible, but actually what we want is the simplest solution possible. So don't feel the need to overcomplicate things. So design sets. We talked a bit about design earlier. So this is about your ability to look at something and understand, is this or is this not well designed? And what does good design look like? And so a common thing to do here is for them to give you an existing product. It might even be their own product. I've used parts of Crowdfund's website last year that I knew needed work. And see whether someone can really recognize opportunities to improve the design or redesign the product. One thing I want to sort of stress, because it's an interesting point, is that one behavior I've seen consistently is an assumption in candidates that everything on the page is sacred. Right? The only opportunities they have are to polish what they see. But actually, good design is as much about what you remove as it is about what you add. Right? And often there are parts of a product that are just redundant or that are just not used. They're adding complexity. They're making the experience more difficult. And the really great candidates are the ones who ask those kinds of questions. What do we really need here? What is the core, the essence of this product? Okay, so analytical skills, this is an interesting one. This is about your ability to work essentially to do estimation, to feel comfortable with numbers. We talked about being data-driven. You'll hear a lot of talk about kind of Google-style interview questions and how Google uses brain teasers and how that's a terrible thing and that they don't do that anymore. And that's all true. Brain teasers are awful and shouldn't be used in interviews. Brain teaser in that context, though, is a problem which can only be solved if you have a sudden flash of inspiration. The classic one is, you get shrunk down to the size of an ant and you're put in a blender that's about to start. How do you escape? Right? Unless you know that the kind of muscle to whatever it is ratio of insects is much higher than humans and they can just jump out, you'll never figure out the answer to that problem. So that's a terrible interview question. But sometimes people confuse what we call Fermi estimation questions with these brain teasers, and they're actually quite a distinct class of question, and they still have some validity to them. A Fermi estimation question is one where you're asked to estimate something with no real supporting data, just based on your intuition. So I've got an example here: how many cinema screens are in the UK? It might be how many planes are in the air over the States right now. How many golf balls can you fit in a mini? Whatever. The point is that it's a problem whereby actually, if you just take a breath and you break it down, you can probably get to a pretty reasonable estimate with without basically looking it up on the internet, which is what you actually do in real life. And so what we're looking for here is not how close you get to the right answer, it's your process. It's can you break this problem down? So the important thing there is really to illustrate how you're thinking about this and how you've gotten to an answer at the end. One last point, sanity check your result. What I have seen in the past is candidates who have a very logical method, but during that process they made one or two bad guesses in terms of some of the figures that you input into the equation that you're effectively defining. And they end up with a result that is clearly nonsense. But because they're so invested in the process, they don't just take a step back and just check. I had an example. I had someone who I was training, actually. I was doing interview training, and I used the how many planes are in the air question because it's, again, very well documented and discussed on the internet, so it will never come up in a real interview anymore. And he went through a process that was actually quite reasonable, but the answer he came up with was 100 million people. So I said to him, so what's the population of the United States? And he said, 300 million people. I said, is 1 in 3 people in the United States in the air right now? So just take a step back and think about these things. Because it's okay, to get it wrong in a sense, if your process is good. But it's even better if you recognize that there might have been a flaw somewhere along the way. Okay, technical skills. So as I mentioned, you're not going to be developing code much of the time, but you're going to be spending a lot of time with engineers. In fact, you will probably be seated with engineers and you will spend more time talking to engineers than any other constituency. And consequently, you need to be able to maintain a high bandwidth conversation with an engineer all the time, right? So you need to be able to discuss technical challenges, complexities, issues that have come up with them without them feeling like they're having to spoon feed you, SQL 101 or whatever. Companies will expect a certain degree of technical competency. The thing here essentially is to demonstrate that you could hold a conversation of that type. and understand a bit about the company beforehand, because most companies will ask you questions that are somewhat pertinent to their business and the technology stack that they use. Oh, that was weird. Okay, strategy. So strategy is essentially, in most cases about how do you extract, how will a particular product generate value? And I use the word value advisedly, I don't just say money, because not all value is money. There are plenty of services out there that generate value by generating good data, or by creating an audience that can then be marketed to later. But the important thing is to identify where the value lies in a particular product in order to understand how you might construct a strategy around it. What you tend to find often with these questions is there are lots and lots of different approaches you can take. And in that room, you don't have the data you need to figure out what is the best approach. So the important thing really is just to demonstrate an ability to recognize opportunities to potentially monetize or extract value out of a product. It's also important to understand, let's say, the bigger picture. What I mean by that is, what is the broader context, what is the broader strategy of the company itself? So if you understand that Facebook's mission is to connect the world, then if you were to propose a strategy, if asked this question, that somehow contradicts with that, that's not going to go down very well. So last tip is practice. There's this great website someone has built where they've just created a huge long list of potential product management interview questions. And it loads one at a time, and there's like a countdown timer. And you can just keep going and keep going and keep going. See how well you cope with those kinds of questions. The last thing I want to say, and this is just general advice, so just humour me. Large technology companies, the likes of Google and what have you, they make a big fuss about their working environment. They'll talk about the football table, the table football. They'll talk about the massages. They'll talk about the free food. They'll talk about the slides and the segways and the ski trips. And that's all great. I'm not going to say it's not great. But it's not actually the thing that will make a difference to whether you enjoy working there or not. The only three things that matter in terms of whether you will enjoy working at a company or not are, do you like the people you're working with? Is the work you're doing interesting? And is the culture of the organisation one that is supportive and positive to you? So, when you're being interviewed, remember that you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. And these are the three things you have to figure out. Because if any of these things, if the answer to any of these questions is bad, you will be miserable, no matter how much free food they throw at you. All right, so we're almost done. I mentioned early on that this is part of a bigger project. This is the website for that project. On there, you will find some supporting material, additional reading. You'll find a copy of this presentation. I've got 3 more copies of this presentation that I meant to upload at some point. And then these product management interviews that I kind of drip feeding onto the site as they're ready. So feel free to take a look at that. And that is that.